Good morning and happy Earth Day to everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us. My name is Karen Hamill, and I am a technical specialist for HalenHardy. And today we are going to be looking at some things that can help you with determining spill response, types of spill response at your facility, and how you can easily train your workers for those times when those spills are incidental. So let's, a few housekeeping measures. First of all, if you would like to raise a question, please use the chat feature. And if you're having problems viewing this video, we are also streaming this live on our YouTube channel. And at the end of the presentation, we also have the ability for you to download a certificate. There will be an email that comes directly to the email that you signed up with in your registration that will include a copy of this presentation, some additional resources, and also the ability to download a link for that certificate if you would like or need one. So let's get started with our presentation. And again, we are talking about incidental spill response. This is a topic that comes up a lot for facilities because, of course, when it comes to spill response, a lot of people immediately think of OSHA's HAZWOPER standard, and there is a lot of ambiguity about what may be an emergency spill versus something that is a routine spill and things that can be easily cleaned up by those frontline workers and the people who discover those spills for the first time. So first of all, spills come in all sizes. Spills happen regularly, routinely for some people, unexpectedly for others, but they can be as small as one drop, or they could be as large as 1,000,000 gallons. It just depends on the type of things that are happening within your organization and how those things are going to affect the course of your day. So here we see two very different types of spills. The spill on the left is something that could spill into that containment system that's designed to hold those leaks or spills. So even though you may have a large volume spill, that could still be an incidental spill for your facility. Whereas the yellow cloud that's sort of happening on the right, that's a spill that may need to be handled by somebody with a bit more training and a bit more knowledge to clean up a spill that's creating that sort of a yellow cloud. So just recognize what kind of spills might happen at your facility. Are they big? Are they small? What typically happens when people are filling containers? What typically happens when they're collecting waste? Things can be different depending on different areas of your facility. They could also be different depending upon the skills and abilities of the people who are able to respond to them. So incidental spills, when OSHA took a look at spill response, and they were prompted to do this when the EPA was looking at creating their standards for RCRA, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. When they were looking at those different sites that were contaminated, they recognized the need for OSHA to help them with protecting workers who were working at those sites. And they developed a set of standards or a set of guidelines for what constitutes an emergency spill, and by default then what an incidental spill is. So incidental spills are usually small in size. That's not always the case. As I mentioned, if you've got a spill that's in a containment area and that spill is not creating a vapor cloud or any type of an emergency situation, that spill could be several hundred or even thousands of gallons and still be a small spill because it's contained and it's in an area. Another criteria for incidental spills is that they don't require immediate evacuation. So this isn't creating a vapor cloud. This isn't creating any kind of a noxious fume or vapor or mist or something that requires people to get out for their own safety. You don't have to evacuate the immediate facility or site. You don't have to evacuate any people in the community. And it can be cleaned up by staff in the immediate area. So this is something that I tipped over the can that I was working with. I tipped over a container. I can clean it up myself. I've got the absorbents or the squeegee or whatever to do it. I don't have to call in a team. It doesn't have to be 20 people to clean up this spill. And an incidental spill, again, looking at these criteria and other things that may factor in based on your facility and your specific needs and your specific levels of training, it's not an emergency. There's nothing about it that requires it to be in that emergency category. So again, looking at those things, they're a little ambiguous, and they're things that unfortunately you kind of have to decide for yourself what makes sense for your facility. In some cases, there is always that rationale that, you know what, every spill is an emergency. We are going to evacuate people and call in our hazmat team. And that is certainly laudable and certainly something that some facilities do. Now, with that, you have the consequences of, okay, I've just taken production offline. I have just interrupted the schedules of everybody that is in the organization. So they're either whichever way you decide to do that, there are consequences to determining whether you want people prepared for incidental spills or whether you do want to handle everything as an emergency. So going to emergency spills, these are things that create some sort of an emergency. And the first one is more of an EPA than an OSHA. This is the spill has entered a storm drain or has entered a body of water. Of course, when a spill does leave your facility and can affect water, air, or the land, you may have a reportable quantity of something getting into the environment. And anytime it does reach that, things sort of change. You're kind of under the onus to get it cleaned up more quickly than if it stays on your property and you sort of maintain that jurisdiction over it versus having another regulator come in to assist or to oversee your cleanup of whatever has left the facility. An emergency spill also creates an unsafe condition. And that can mean a lot of things. So an unsafe condition could be, again, it's an inhalation hazard, or perhaps it's in an area that is hard to access. Maybe it's in a confined space. Maybe it's in some other area that is not as user-friendly to be in and clean up that spill. It necessitates an evacuation. Again, this goes into an evacuation of your specific site, or this could be an evacuation of the public. And it requires outside resources. So this is when you're calling in that trained hazmat team, that team that has gone through a specific training for spill response, or perhaps an outside organization, or perhaps community resources. So this could be your local fire, your local hazmat team, your local EMS, whoever that may be. So when you look into that emergency situation, you need to have that higher level of diligence. Something is going to hurt somebody or has hurt somebody in a situation. That kind of gives you that differentiation between whether or not those frontline workers can handle it as a regular course of the day, or you do need those people with that additional training. So looking at that, there can be still a lot of things that you need to decide. And don't rely solely on the properties of the chemical to determine whether or not a spill will always be incidental or always be an emergency. A good example of this, I worked with a facility that had a sanitizing chemical that they used in their process. It was a food manufacturing facility, and they used this chemical every day. And this chemical was received in bulk, and it was stored in a tank, and it was stored kind of at one end of their facility. And they dispensed from a pipeline that went to different areas. And like I said, this was something that everybody was familiar with using. And it was a chemical that was used well, used properly, and served a great purpose. And in most areas and in most cases, they didn't think a thing about it because it was so frequently used. However, if it were to be released from the container that it arrived in, if for some reason that tank had a breach, it was something that they determined was at a concentration that created an unsafe condition. And this chemical that they used every day, when spilled, created an emergency situation for them. They would actually evacuate their facility and call in their in-house hazmat team. Same chemical, different properties. So chemical in use every day versus bulk of that chemical being released at one time. So it could be something where you need to evaluate that chemical being used in your facility every day versus a spill situation. What makes it different? Does anything make it different? If it's something like oil, It may not create that emergency situation unless it gets into a storm drain, but with certain chemicals, that could be a differentiator that you might need to spell out when you're looking at planning. Some things that you should also take into consideration when you're looking at creating or defining incidental spills. Do you have confined spaces that could make that spill response different? Take, for example, flammable liquids, maybe an alcohol or a gasoline or a diesel fuel. If those spills are on land, that's one thing. You know how to handle that. Maybe that's something that you deal with every day. Excuse me. But when that gets into a confined space, how does that change? Are those vapors going to be sufficient that you need to change your response? Do people now need to wear respiratory protection? Do I now need to worry about flash protection? Is there something that could be in that confined space that creates that emergency situation? I'll clean up hundreds of gallons of gasoline spilled on land every day, but put 1 gallon in a confined space, and that's something that makes me think twice before responding. So consider those situations. Do you have those confined spaces that could change that into an emergency spill from an incidental, regardless of the volume? This is a spill of, this was a hydraulic line that blew. Nothing really here that would make me think twice about having somebody clean up that spill who was in that immediate area. So even though that spill looks a little bit big, probably something that still would be incidental unless there was something not in that picture that could change that situation. Simple cutting fluid, probably getting onto the floor, probably creating a slippery situation for your workers if you're working indoors or outdoors. I'm not sure if you would be cutting outdoors, but it's possible that this is something that is probably going to fall into that incidental range. Still something you want to take care of because you don't want people slipping and falling, but probably not something that's going to be creating an emergency situation. This is mercury. Mercury is a very special case. It's something that can get into the atmosphere. It has no smell, it has no taste. So it's something that you are not going to necessarily notice, but something that does require a very specialized response. Probably something that if you are working with mercury in any capacity, you would want to have a trained workers be able to respond to that spill situation. So even though the spill may be very, very small, it could create that situation where you do need to evacuate and you do need to treat that as an emergency. This is a battery charging area. Is there anything there that could, if the battery acid is spilled, is it properly ventilated? Is it an area where that could potentially create any sort of emergency? Or is it well ventilated? Your people are well trained and they can clean it up quickly. Again, something for you to determine and consider if you do have that situation. This is an outdoor area. It is an area that is in the public, and here we see a little bit of a sheen, a little bit of a slag happening toward the edge of it. Could that be reportable? It might be. If this is a retention pond or a detention pond, that might be something that kind of gives you a little bit of a leeway to get it cleaned up there before it would be released into the environment. But what is that situation? Is this something that if you have a release, you have the ability to pull it into a detention pond and buy yourself a little time? Or is this something that could be reportable for you because it's been released directly into the environment? Consider where that spill would go if it happened at your site or at your facility. This is an unknown chemical. Not sure what this is. If your people aren't sure what it is and can't identify it, if that spill is in a location where spills shouldn't necessarily be, it may be time to have them step back and teach them to step back and know what that spill is before they clean it up and before they can harm themselves. So an unknown spill is something that could throw you into that emergency category, even though this looks relatively small. We don't know what it is. We don't know why it's in that area. Those are all things that could be cause for concern. And we'll talk a little bit more about that toward the end of the presentation. So when you're creating your spill response training, there are, as we've already sort of alluded to, a lot of different things for you to consider. And these are things that can help your training become better or add clarity to training that you are presenting to your workforce and to your frontline workers and those people who are actually the first responders at your scene, because they're the ones who either made or discovered the spill. So looking first at having clarity on what can spill at your facility, knowing where those liquids are stored, knowing what type of liquids you have stored. Do you have mainly oils and fuels? Do you have hydraulic fluids? Do you have acids and bases? Do you have water-based chemicals? What's there that can spill? And basically any liquid that you've got in any form or size or quantity can be a potential for a spill, of course. So knowing what you've got on site can help you to create those plans and start to develop that clarity about what might be incidental versus emergency. So start with your chemical inventory. Look at your hazard communication standard. What is on site? If you've got a good, robust chemical inventory, that's your sort of your first delve into what I've got here. How much of it do I have? Might even tell you where it's being stored. Also consider any suppliers, contractors, or neighbors in the area. It's not common, but when that big truck rolls up to your dock, you don't know what's on it necessarily. When that door opens, could something spill? There's always that potential. And in that case, you probably want to get with the driver and look at his manifest and see if anything on there is going to create a problem for you. What are your contractors doing? I worked for a company that was undergoing some renovation, and they had different construction vehicles on site, and one of them was a backloader, and it blew a hydraulic line, created a huge spill that went over the entire parking lot, and fortunately entered a ditch that we were able to stop before it got into the environment. But those contractors, those suppliers that you have on site, those neighbors in your community, are they doing anything, or can they possibly create a spill potential for you? Because unfortunately, even though it may not be your responsibility, if you've got a big name, guess who's going to be on the news? It's probably going to be you and not the little contractor that nobody knows about. So that is something that can add that element to your training that isn't necessarily considered by other people. Your neighbors, how can they affect you? If they have a spill, is that going to affect you in any way? Will you need to evacuate your employees? Will you need to evacuate your customers? Those are things that, again, not necessarily your responsibility, but things that you could consider when you are considering your spill response plans. The next thing, kind of related to that chemical inventory, review your safety data sheets. Are there things on site that can hurt you, that can create that emergency situation? What are the chemicals' properties? Is that going to help you in any way? Absolutely, because you're going to know if it creates a vapor cloud. You're going to know if that vapor cloud is going to sink or fall. Those properties of the chemical are going to help clarify what might create that emergency situation and what may necessitate you having that trained response team versus being able to teach your workers as part of other safety trainings that you may do on how to clean up just those incidental spills and be prepared for them. And finally, where can it spill? Of course, things can spill anywhere, but there are a lot of areas where a spill is more likely. And if you're looking at training and you're looking at your higher risk areas, and you're looking at sort of mitigating the biggest problems, you can't really start with anywhere. It's better to have a little more of an idea of where those spills are most likely and to be able to plan for those areas as opposed to trying to plan for everything from the get-go. Liquid transfer areas are a big area for spills. So anywhere that you're dispensing fluids or collecting fluids. So fuel islands, uh, stations where bulk fluids are stored and dispensed, oil collection areas, bulk waste collection areas, terminals where anything is collected in a liquid form or transferred in any capacity. Those are a big area for spills because containers overfill, things get splashed. They're an area that may be one of the less tidy areas within a site or an organization or facility. Those are great areas to be prepared for spills, great areas for spill kits, great areas for paper towels, even whatever it would take to clean up that spill so that it's not left to get into the environment or to create a slip and fall hazard for your workforce. Liquid storage areas. Most containers arrive in good condition, but there's always a potential for spills in a storage area. Here we see a lot of different totes. If one of those were to get punctured, you could easily have a mess in your warehouse. This might be drums, it might be cans, it might be plastic containers. Think about how your products arrive and where you store them. Are they all stored in an area that is designed to be cleaned up easily? Are they stored in areas that are hard to get to and where responding to a spill is going to be difficult or complicated? Think about those things and how they might influence your spill response. Outdoor locations. These can be difficult because if you don't have secondary containment within your area, of course, that spill is more likely to get to the environment. So look for tanks, look for covered warehouse, covered awnings, covered places where you might store several drums until they can get into a different storage area. Also consider your pipelines. If you've got any piping that leads from bulk storage into a process or into another area, into an operational area, those are all potentials for spills. Any connections within the piping especially can make an area more vulnerable for spills. And of course, outdoors, you've got the other elements. You've got the potential for rain, snow, sleet, and anything else, that hurricanes, tornadoes. Anytime you're storing liquids outdoors, that can change the course of your spill response from incidental into an emergency situation. Also consider, when you are looking at spill response and creating your plans, who needs to know about a spill situation. And this is something that, even if you take the no hands approach and you're always going to call in a hazmat team to clean up your spill, it's important that you are able to communicate internally as well as externally that a spill has happened and everyone knows their role within that spill response. So not only the employees who are in the area and who will respond to the spill in an incidental or an emergency situation, but also other people who are involved in that response, especially at a larger facility. And especially if the spill might become an emergency or is an emergency spill, be sure to include your security personnel, those people who stand at that front line and protect your facility on a regular basis. When they know that a spill has happened, they can then take the actions to make sure that they aren't admitting extra people into the situation. They can hold off suppliers at the gate. They can hold off your customers at the gate so that they're not getting into a situation that could cause them harm. They can also be more aware of any of the public that's coming to look at a situation and doesn't really need to be there. Supervisors certainly should know about the situation. Supervisors can then start looking for trends. They can be providing assistance. They can be doing those other things that need to be done to ensure that that spill gets cleaned up quickly, and everybody has the resources that they need to do what needs to be done. Safety managers, they're always looking out for the safety of everybody involved at the facility. So they're going to want to know that the situation has happened. They're going to be looking for health effects if it is an emergency spill. They're going to be looking at chemical properties and doing those other things kind of behind the scenes that help ensure that your situation will be corrected quickly. If it is an emergency spill, your public relations department is something that is going to be essential to get that word out to the community, create that public assurance that everything in your power is being done, letting people know if they need to be evacuated, letting people know what symptoms to look for if it is a high chemical emergency. And of course, anybody who would need to be refilling those spill response supplies. One thing that I've seen time and time and time again over the past 30 plus years of visiting facilities is you go to a spill kit and there's nothing in it. It's empty. People have taken one or two pads at a time and they've cleaned spills up with them and nobody restocks the kit. So That's something that's nice to assign to your safety committee or to a maintenance supervisor or somebody that has the specific responsibility to routinely look at those kits. And that's the same somebody that you could call, or the same people that you could call after a spill to make sure that that kit is replenished and ready for your next incident. Also, again, for an emergency spill, who do you need to call? When do you need to call them? And unfortunately, there's no straight answer here. There are a lot of different regulations that are out there, and the same spill might be reportable in one situation and not in another. If it gets into the environment, so into water or off of your property, chances are you're going to need to notify it. I can't think of many situations where you wouldn't need to, but if it stays on your facility, depending on what it is, it can get a little gray about what needs to be reported and what doesn't. But you may need to make federal, state, and local notifications. And there are a lot of resources to help the people who need to make those notifications. But chances are good it's not the guy on the floor that's going to need to make those. It's going to be a supervisor or somebody in a position that knows what needs to be reported and when. So review your current plans. Do they currently reflect what is happening at your site, at your facility? Things change a lot, especially at facilities in construction or facilities that are outdoors, utilities. Situations change a lot and they can change very quickly. A plan that's written 5, 10 years ago may no longer be relevant for what is happening. Are your scenarios identified? Have you taken the time to look at what chemicals are on site and whether or not those spills of those chemicals are going to be incidental or emergency? Do you need to have that differentiation of a spill in this area is going to be incidental versus the spill of the same chemical in another area being an emergency? Are there conflicts between your plans? As facilities grow, you may need to add plans from time to time. Do the plans contradict each other? Does your SPCC plan have the same response as your contingency plan, as your COOP plan, as your emergency action plan? There are a lot of different plans out there, and if they're created independently and created in a vacuum, they can create confusion for your employees. And do they clearly define what your frontline employees need to do? Are they going to notify somebody to clean it up? Are they going to clean it up themselves? Are they going to call security? What exactly do they need to do to get that situation under control and get it taken care of quickly and safely? So when you have set all of those things in place, you've created your plans, you have differentiated between incidental and emergency spills, looking at the things that those frontline employees can do to clean up spills, those incidental spills. There is an acronym that I've created to help facilitate that training. As a reminder, if that spill is an emergency, those responders need to be trained under OSHA's HAZWOPER standard. So if they are going to take defensive action, if they're going to stop an emergency leak, so this is something that is that has the potential to create harm to a person or property, they would need to be trained under that HAZWOPER standard. So this applies to anything that you would define as an emergency. So whether you're going to train these people in-house, or you're going to use community resources, or you're going to hire an outside contractor, anybody who is in that emergency capacity would need to be trained to the appropriate level under HAZWOPER. But for those incidental spills, those things that we've determined haven't created that emergency situation, they're just sort of a nuisance, they're a housekeeping thing, they are an interruption to the day, but nobody is going to need to immediately evacuate, no emergency situation has been created. This training can be incorporated into any other safety training that you may already be doing for your workers. So as they're learning about their process, as they're learning about other good housekeeping, this is a training that could be incorporated into that to help them to be prepared and to be able to safely respond to those small spills that might happen daily, weekly, or more routinely than that big emergency spill. Like everything else, they should be practiced. Hopefully spills aren't happening every day. Hopefully you're not breaking into that spill kit every day to clean up a spill that's happened. So something that, just like you would review fall protection, or you would review your HAZCOM standard, or wearing eye protection, incorporate your incidental spill response into those routine trainings that you're doing, into your tailgates, into those quick meetings that you have to review safety throughout your facility. So the acronym that we have developed to help train people on incidental spill response is SCAR, SCAR. Kind of like using PASS when you're teaching people to use fire extinguishers. This can help your employees or your workforce remember what to do to clean up that spill safely so that they're not creating harm to themselves or to anyone else. And the S stands for safe and secure. Is this safe for me to do? Do I know what has spilled? If I've spilled it, chances are good that I do know what has spilled. If it's a spill that I discover, can I see what container it has come from? Does it make sense for there to be a spill in this area? Is there any unsafe condition that can make this an emergency situation? Is it in a confined space and I'm not sure what it is? Or is it in a confined space and I know that it can hurt me? What about this spill don't I know? And if the answer is nothing, then I'm good to go to the next step. Can I secure the area? Can I put up a barricade, a piece of caution tape, a cone, something to keep people out of the area so that I can clean that up safely and not worry about others coming into the area or any traffic coming into the area? Once I know that it's safe, once I know that it's secure, I can move to the next step, C. C stands for confine. And remember that this is an incidental spill. So we're not talking about confinement in terms of HAZWOPER, because when it is an emergency spill, that would necessitate several layers of training. But remember that we are talking about an incidental spill. We've not created that emergency situation. So we're still able to confine a spill and clean it up in the incidental context. So we might be confining that spill on water. We might be confining that spill on land. And of course, on water, that's going to be on our property, not a release into the environment. But confining the spill is important because if you've confined it, it's not going to get any larger if you've properly confined a spill. So we want to encircle that spill. That might be creating just one line. It might be creating three-sided, or it might be encircling it with a boom, whatever that might mean for your facility. It might be just a sock if it's a very small spill. If it's less than 2 or 3 gallons, you certainly don't need to pull out a big boom to do that. You might be able to do that with a simple 4-foot sock, or you might even be able to do it with some absorbent pads, whatever that might mean at your facility. What tools, what equipment do you have to help them confine a spill and keep it from spreading? The smaller you can keep a spill, the faster it can be cleaned up safely. The A stands for absorb, and recognizing that not all spills need to be absorbed. Maybe after you've confined it, you can use a squeegee to recover it, or a vacuum to recover it. Maybe that makes more sense for you because you're going to have less waste after that. But in the case of incidental spills, most of them are small and most people are absorbing them. So working from the outside in, the A stands for absorb. You're going to work from that confined area and gather everything toward the center. So gather those spent materials and keep everything within that circle that you've created, making that circle smaller and smaller as you go, absorbing that spill and getting everything cleaned up. The nice thing about working from the outside is it's going to keep your boots clean and it's going to help minimize the chance for slips and falls. And of course, absorbing, we also want to make sure that that area is cleaned up afterwards. So after you have taken all those absorbents from the area, gathered them into your collection container or your disposal bags, whatever it may be, make sure the area is also cleaned up and they have the ability to do that. So maybe that's a mop bucket and water, maybe that's running the floor scrubber, whatever that may be. So you don't have those residuals that could cause a slip and fall accident. So we have S for secure and safe, C for confine, A for absorb, and the final step is R. R stands for reporting and restocking. And reporting is important because it can identify trends. So if we have spills that are always happening in a certain area, what's happening in the area that's creating those spills? Do I need to change a process? Do I need to change how a chemical is stored? Do I need to change the containers that it's stored in? what can I do so that this isn't happening time after time? And by reporting those spills, even if they're only a few drips or even a gallon or whatever that potential may be, reporting that spill, reporting that interruption in whatever else you were doing is kind of like a near miss if you're thinking of safety. It's something that is going to help that supervisor, help that safety manager, help whoever is looking at those reports know that something is not working in this area and something needs to be changed so that we're not interrupting our day and cleaning up spills every day in the same area. So this might be a team leader, this might be a safety manager, whoever that might be. Reporting lets them know that, and also reporting lets them know that any materials that you have used need to be restocked, so you don't have those empty spill kits. So you don't go to the shelf and find nothing there to help you with that spill response. Because what happens then? People are people. They're going to leave that spill. It's going to linger longer, and it's going to create that potential for that unsafe situation, for slips and falls, or for that to get spread to other areas and be even harder to clean up because now it's been tracked all through the site instead of just in that contained area. So reporting and restocking helps to prevent that and helps to ensure that people are prepared for that next situation when it does happen. So simple acronym SCAR, safe, confine, absorb, and report. That can help to train your workers when you are looking at helping them through that incidental spill response. So wrapping up, remembering that no two spills are the same, and there really isn't a lot of guidance out there that's going to help you, in a checklist form or something, say that this chemical is always going to be incidental, this chemical is always going to be an emergency. Like other things, it's something that needs to be evaluated at your facility based on the liquids that you have, how your people are trained, where those things are stored, and where they could spill. Knowing those things are really going to help you to create a robust spill response plan that will work for your facility and help to keep people safe when they are responding to those incidental spills, and also to know when they need to step back and let those emergency responders take care of the situation. And I'd again like to thank all of you for your time. And I'm going to check the chat to see if we have any questions. Feel free to pop those into the chat. And I'm taking a look here. I do not see any questions at this time. So I'm going to put up this screen, and this is my contact information is there, as well as two of our reps, Troy and Mike. They are both well versed in spill response as well, so they'd be glad to help you with questions, as would I. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. And again, thank you for joining us. We will be sending out an email with a copy of this presentation, as well as a link for certificates. Enjoy your day.